Pour un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, I want to be in that building on a Saturday night.
What's going on, gang? Welcome to the show. Bienvenue à HABS Therapy Day, a bilingual show for fans who value substance over spectacle. Pas de rumeurs, pas de clickbait, juste de l'analyse sérieuse basée sur les faits. We offer informed, reasoned perspectives on the Montreal Canadiens, des points de vue réfléchis, loin du bruit médiatique. If you're looking for honest discussion and real information, vous êtes au bon endroit. This is HABS Therapy Day. Ici, HABS Therapy Day. Let's get started, guys. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're live on YT. We're also live on TikTok. If you're over on TikTok, come join us on YT. If you're new to the show, then I certainly invite you to give us a follow, subscribe down below, hit the notification bell. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up. If you're watching the show after the fact, same applies. We would really love to hear from you, and we would love to have you part of our group. We had a bunch of new subscribers after our last show, so thank you guys for that, all you new subscribers out there. We are trying to get to 500 subscribers. That's our goal. We've been working on that for a while now. We're getting closer, but it still is a ways off. So let's see if we can get there together. Obviously, we're trying to build a community here where we can all get together and have intelligent conversations about our favorite team, or maybe not your favorite team. Maybe you're a fan of another team and you just come here for the content. So, but we're trying to build a community where we can have objective and intelligent conversations about hockey and about the Montreal Canadiens. So if that's interesting to you, then please subscribe. C'est aussi une émission bilingue. C'est une place pour parler au sujet des Canadiens de Montréal, au sujet de hockey, dans une manière objective, une manière intelligente. On va parler à propos des Canadiens, mais on n'est pas ici pour simplement être des fans, des partisans. On veut prendre une approche plus objective à notre équipe pour discuter, avoir des conversations sur des sujets importants qui se rapportent avec le Canadien de Montréal. So today's show, guy, we're going to talk about the Montreal Canadiens rumor mill. We're going to talk about the rumors going around Montreal, about the team, about the organization, about the players, and so on and so forth. But we're also going to look at sort of why the rumor mill in Montreal is the way that it is, and how we as fans can respond to or react to the rumor mill in a way that makes a little bit more sense. How we can respond to the rumors, because there are a ton of them. We're in probably, the biggest hockey market in the world. And, because of that, things can get a little bit out of hand at times. And as fans, I think it's sort of, it's easy to get caught up in everything. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. Alors, aujourd'hui, on va parler au sujet des rumeurs qui entourent l'équipe, qui entourent la ville de Montréal, qui entourent les Canadiens de Montréal, et on va parler à propos de comment on peut répondre, on peut réagir quand on entend des rumeurs qui parlent des échanges, des nouveaux joueurs, les coachs, l'équipe, toutes les choses comme ça. Comment devrait-on répondre, réagir comme des fans de Montréal, des fans intelligents, des fans objectifs, les partisans qui savent, qui prennent une approche un peu plus, réfléchie, un peu plus sérieux, une approche plus sérieuse aux Canadiens. So again, let's talk about the rumors. I mean, obviously the rumor mill in Montreal is as big as it gets anywhere else. When it comes to hockey, there's very few places in the world where there's as much attention played to hockey. The Montreal Canadiens are probably, if not the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's Toronto and Montreal are the two biggest markets for hockey in the world. So obviously, you've got a fan base in Montreal that's always turned on. You've got a fan base that, at least has a working knowledge of hockey and a working understanding of how the game goes and how, not just on the ice, but off the ice as well, right? And, the majority of Montreal Canadiens fans have been fans for a long time. They're not new to the team. They're not new to the game. They sort of have been around, and they've grown to have some expectations, right? And the expectations that the fans in Montreal have, come from a number of years, depending on how old you are and how long you've been around. Your expectations of the Canadiens, at the very least, are that you're going to have a lot of information and you're going to have access to a lot of what's going on with the team, right? So you've got a fan base that's accustomed to winning. The Canadiens have a winning tradition. Obviously, it's been some time since the team won a Stanley Cup, but historically the team has been relatively successful. The last number of years have been perhaps less successful from a historical point of view, but in general, Montreal Canadiens fans are used to winning. They're not used to rebuilding. They're used to being a franchise that's successful, and they're not used to the rebuild is a new thing to Montreal Canadiens fans. They're historically the Canadiens were used to, or the Canadiens fans were used to, quick reactions when there were perceived problems with the team, right? When there were perceived issues with the team, if there was a problem, they were used to a management group that would respond relatively quickly to those problems, right? And they, the fans always sort of prided themselves of having their finger on the pulse and sort of knowing what was going on with the team and knowing what needed to be done. And the fans' opinions and the management's opinions would often be sort of in lockstep with one another, right? They were always looking for the team to fix problems, right? The team loses 5 or 6, 7 games in a row, and the fans would start calling for something to happen, and management would often acquiesce to that. The Canadiens fans are always looking for the big moves, right? The Canadiens are, like I said, one of the bigger teams around. And so fans sort of expect the big team to make the big moves, right? To be in the middle of all of the action, right? To be the New York Yankees, to be the Dallas Cowboys of the NHL, to be the team that's in the middle of all of the action. And, if big things are going down, they want Montreal to be a part of it. So, the Canadiens fans are always looking, especially in the offseason, for big trades, big moves. The expression we often hear is the team is looking to make a splash, right? So there's always sort of this drive from Montreal Canadiens fans for perfection, and that if there's something wrong with the team, it needs to be fixed now, right? It needs to be fixed right away. And historically, the ownership and the management has sort of, been influenced by that, or certainly, the fans' opinions or the fans' approach and the team's approach have sort of been in line with one another, and that's perhaps not the case anymore. Another factor is, of course, the Montreal media, right? You've got the Montreal media who now has to satisfy this voracious appetite that the Montreal fan base has, right? You've got a large fan base, and you've got a fan base with huge expectations who are always looking for information, right? They always want, it can be July or it can be December. The fan base is always looking for something. They want stories, they want news, they want to know what's going on. And so you've got this large market in Montreal where you've got, radio, print, television. Now you've got, bloggers and social media, and you've got everything. And there's just so much, there's so much media, and there's so much appetite for content that, you've got this market that is, sort of bending over backwards to sort of feed that appetite, right? And there's tons of competition. The competition, this competition is looking for, the media is looking or is competing with each other to get those clicks, to get those views, to get those readers, right? You've got BPM Sports, and you've got TVA, and you've got RDS, and you've got the Athletic, and you've got, the Montreal Gazette, and you've got, TSN, you've got TSN 690, you've got, then, you sort of go to the non-traditional stuff. You've got all these podcasts, you've got, everybody's got a podcast, everybody's got a social media account. So all of these different outlets are fighting for the viewers, right? And there's a lot of them out there, and there's an appetite out there for all of this stuff. But these outlets are all fighting for, fighting for those views, fighting for those clicks, fighting for those readers. So when it comes June, July, August, you've got all of these outlets, and they're willing to abandon, essentially any journalistic rules and standards have been completely thrown out the window. You don't have to have any type of, evidence or support or facts to base any of your opinions or your rumors on nowadays. You can just publish something, right? You can go on Twitter, you can go on Blue Sky, you can go on, wherever, and you can just publish rumors. You don't have to have a source, let alone, multiple sources, like, historically you would, hope to have, historically you would hope to have multiple sources, right? For, before you would, pass a rumor out there. If you heard that, Joe Blow was going to be traded, you would want to have heard that from 2-3 different sources before you would go, go public with it, right? That's all out the window nowadays, right? So, the media, traditional and non-traditional, are now willing to, they're willing to speculate, they're willing to abandon all sense of reality in order to get that engagement, in order to get those clicks, those readers, those views. So now you're seeing, trade proposals, right? Like that somebody has just made up out of their mind. The Canadiens should trade, Mike Matheson and Jaden Struble to Toronto for, Nylander and a third-round draft pick. And it's completely brought out of the blue. And it makes no sense, and it's strictly designed to to sort of not only to respond to that thirst or that hunger that the Montreal Canadiens fan base has, but it's also intended to sort of build up a bit of a feeding frenzy, right? Froth up the waters a little bit to get things going, right? And RDS will do this, and TV, and we're not, we're talking about mainstream media outlets that are doing this. It's not just sort of, podcasters and vloggers like me who are doing this kind of stuff, although they are definitely doing places like HABS Digest, right? If you go to HABS Digest YouTube account, every title is like, the biggest blockbuster in the history of the Montreal Canadiens is going to happen in the next 24 hours, and you have to watch our show if you want to find out about it, right? And this is what's going on now. And so rumors have now become a huge part of the landscape when it comes to being a Montreal Canadiens fan, right? Like, especially this time of year, there's rumors flying everywhere. Like, the Canadiens have been connected with, any of like 20 different players this summer alone, right? We've heard Crosby, we've heard Taves, we've heard Ehlers, we've heard Marchessault, we've heard Nick Hague, we've heard, all of these, dozens of, all of these dozens of players who have been Kairu, the rumors have just been, one after another, and as soon as one rumor dies, another one comes about. It's just one after another, one after another, one after another, right? And historically, the Montreal Canadiens organization, rumors have, those rumors have sort of meant a little bit more historically under old management, right? The team, as I mentioned earlier, was, reactionary. There was a lack of patience. There was, a sense that, if things were going badly, if there were 3 or 4 losses in a row, the team had to do something right away, and then something would get in the media, and then, before you know it, PK Subban's been traded for Shea Weber, or Claude Julien's been fired again, or all of these things, right? It was a very reactionary organization. They were affected by the media, and they were affected by fan pressure, right? If the fan pressure got to be enough, management would actually, be influenced by that, right? If the fans were calling for, a trade, or calling for a change, or calling for something, the management would sort of, they would allow that to influence their decision making. And, there was no real vision or long-term plan. They were always just trying to fix things, right? It was like, what's the next problem? Oh, we'll fix that. Oh, what's the next problem? We'll put a Band-Aid on that. What's the next problem? Well, and the idea was, oh, we always want to be good now. There was never any long-term plan. And as a result, the actions were relatively inconsistent, right? One action didn't seem to relate to another action. Like there was no long-term strategy. There was no, way to connect the decision-making that was going on with the organization that demonstrated a long-term vision or plan. And so now, and the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because I think it's important to know this about management when you're considering, these rumors, when you're on Twitter or when you're on Blue Sky or when you're on whatever platform you use, and somebody's telling you that the Montreal Canadiens are, involved in discussions about so-and-so player, you need to understand how, not only how management currently works, but how they're now different than the way management used to be under, prior, general managers like, guys like Bergevin and Bob Gainey and Régent Houle and Serge Savard and all. Like it's different, right? So now, we use the term rebuilding plan, and everyone's talking about the rebuild in Montreal. But part of the rebuild is, there are philosophies and principles that the Montreal Canadiens management are bringing to the rebuild, but not just to the rebuild, but to the organization in general, which is why, the rebuild is a rebuild, but, these principles and these values, I think, will carry on, into the future, especially if Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes stick around, or for as long as they stick around, these principles will be, will be a part of the organization. And it's important to understand these principles when you're evaluating or when you're hearing, the rumors that, the media continues to inundate you with as a fan, right? So you need to understand that the Canadiens, under their rebuild, but that Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes, they prioritize internal development, right? They would much rather develop a player from within than go out and trade and sign for somebody. That's not to say that they're not going to make trades. That's not to say that they're not going to go out and sign free agents. It just means that they're going to give a preference to developing players from within. They would much rather draft their own player. They would much rather, build that player up through their own organization, and they've committed the resources and the time to that, right? They're not going to go out and build a team off of players who have been developed by other organizations. And I guess a step beyond that is, not only are they going to prefer guys from within their own organization, but they're also going to prefer guys, if they are going to make a trade or a signing, they're going to prefer guys who they can, that can quote unquote grow with the group, right? That's a term that you hear all the time. I'm repeating myself on a lot of this stuff. If you've been here before and you watch the show regularly, this is, these are things that I repeat all the time. But they're not going to go out and sign a guy who, is 35 years old and, is on the downswing of his career. They'd much rather go out and sign Noah Dobson, who's 25, who is still young enough to join the group and grow and develop and build as part of the group. The new management is patient, right? They're not out there making trades out of necessity. They're not out there making trades out of desperation. They know they have a long-term plan and that they don't have to, win the Stanley Cup yesterday. They don't need to win the Stanley Cup this year. They're going to be patient, right? They're going to be patient with their young players. They're going to be patient with their prospects, and they're going to give those prospects an opportunity to be a part of the solution, right? They're not just going to dump them and get rid of them just so they can bring in, some guy in his mid-30s who can, play for a year or two and fill a hole or fill a gap. They're going to prefer to keep that prospect. The long-term plan, right? What is the long-term plan? The long-term plan is to be a sustainable, perennial Stanley Cup contender, right? They're not building towards one great season. They're not building towards, a single Stanley Cup. There's not a pie at the end of the tunnel or something that they're, once they get to that goal, then everything's abandoned and they abandon all of their philosophies and principles. The goal is to bring sustainability to the organization, right? They're not out there, they're not saying, okay, well, now we're close. Now we can sort of, start trading our prospects and mortgaging our future so that we can, we can win now. They're not going to do that. They're very tuned in with what's going on around the league, right? The Canadiens management, I think, is very attentive to, all of, the other teams and what they're doing and what they're talking about. And if there's a trade or a player, who's available somewhere, they're going to explore it. They're going to explore all possibilities. And I feel like they believe it's their job to do that, right? If there's a player out there that's available, I feel like I feel like they feel like they're obliged to explore that. And so, when they hear, even if the player may not be someone that they're particularly interested in. So they're very hardworking. They're very thorough. They're exploring every single option, every possibility that's out there. You heard Jeff Gorton recently, right? He did an interview recently with RG Media with D'Amico and Jimmy Murphy, Marco D'Amico and Jimmy Murphy. He did an interview with Arpon Basu and Marc-Antoine Godin, and you hear him like, the trades that they're making were ones that, they came to because they were being attentive and they were, around and they were being available and they were, paying attention to what's going on around the league. They didn't go around saying, okay, guys, we're looking to shop our 2 first-round draft picks and, Emil Heineman's available. What are you guys going to offer us for that? Or, these guys are on the market. And, and then, the Rangers called, or the Islanders called them up and said, well, what about, Dobson? No, that's not what happened. Kent Hughes had his ear to the ground. And, it came to his attention that Noah Dobson might be available in a trade. And so he made that move, right? Same with Zachary Bolduc, right? They were obviously talking to the Blues about, it's quite clear that Jordan Kyrou was out there. They were clearly that went, we'll talk to them about that. Well, okay, it's not going to work out for Kyrou. Well, maybe we can get somebody else. And they ended up getting Bolduc at a pretty good price, right? So when you're trading or you're making moves in that way, right? When you're not the one who's out there looking for the trade and you're the one who is just sort of, trolling, and throwing your net out there and hope, seeing what comes up, you often get better deals, right? Because you're not in a position of desperation. You have a better negotiation point of view. Like you're coming at the negotiation from a better perspective, right? You can live or you can, give or take that deal, right? Oh, well, you guys want Reinbacher for Noah Dobson? Well, sorry, we're not interested. And you walk away because, you weren't out there dying to get Noah Dobson. And then they come back to you and say, okay, well, maybe we'll take Heineman instead of Reinbacher. Okay, well, that's a better deal. Now we can do that, right? So you come from a better negotiating position when you're not out there sort of desperately seeking this guy, right? The Habs need a second line center, right? So historically, Marc Bergevin would have been out there, offering everybody, letting the whole world know that the Canadiens need a second line center. And going from team to team saying, we'll give you this and we'll give you that and we'll give you, and you end up making bad deals because you end up taking a guy who may not be the best guy for the job, and you end up paying too much for them because they know the other team knows that you're desperate. So I think all of these things are important to keep in mind when you're reading and you're hearing about these rumors, right? This is the reason why there are so many rumors involving the Canadiens this summer, because if the New York Islanders or if the, I'm trying to think of an example, if the Pittsburgh Penguins are putting feelers out there around the league that maybe Sidney Crosby's available, yeah, the Canadiens are going to inquire about that, right? Kent Hughes is going to call them up and say, well, what are you looking for? What do you want in return for him? And, maybe it's way too much, right? Oh, they want, a first round pick and a top prospect. We want Reinbacher. Okay, that doesn't really interest us. But guess what? Now the Pittsburgh Penguins are shopping the word out there or spreading a leak out there that, Sidney Crosby might be on the market and the following teams have expressed interest, right? The Canadiens, the Rangers, the Islanders, and the Bruins have all expressed interest, and the Colorado Avalanche. Why are they doing that? They want to drive up the price, right? They're trying to increase the price, right? The Canadiens are not leaking information about these trades. It's not. I mean, if you listen to Jeff Gorton talk to Arpon Basu and Marc-Antoine Godin, there's no leaks coming out of the Montreal organization, right? We heard a little bit about the Dobson trade, before it was made, but again, that's the Islanders. It's either the Islanders or the player agent who's leaking that information. It's not coming from the Montreal organization. So if you're hearing a rumor about the Canadiens being involved somewhere, typically it's coming from either an agent or the other organization. It's not coming from Montreal. They don't leak info. I mean, unless it's got some strategic reason for doing it, unless they've got, some strategic reason to spread a little bit of misinformation out there to put people off the scent of something they're trying to do. The Canadiens are not leaking. They're not. It's not a leaky. Despite what they were historically under previous administrations, it's not a leaky group right now. They're not leaking. So, so all of these things relate. So if you're hearing a rumor, the Canadiens are interested in Sidney Crosby. Of course, they're interested in Sidney Crosby, but they're only going to take him if they can get him at an absolute crazy discount, right? If Sidney Crosby goes to Dubas and says, listen, I guess I'm willing to leave here, but the only place I'm really going to go to is Montreal, or the only two places I'm going to go are either Montreal and Colorado. Well, guess what? Montreal and Colorado are going to get a deal because, or he's not coming at all. Montreal's not going to give up the farm to get, and that's the only way they're really going to get Crosby. It's the only really way they're going to get Jordan Kyrou, right? The only way they're going to get Jordan Kyrou is if they get a really good deal on him because St. Louis wants to dump his contract, right? And St. Louis is looking to make cap space for other things in their organization, which also brings to mind the Canadiens also have cap issues, and you got to keep all of that in mind as well. So all of that to say, guys, when you're hearing all of these rumors, when you're hearing about Taves, Crosby, Kyrou, Horvat, Cirelli, Veleno, Jared McCann, Jonathan Marchessault, Claude Giroux, Nikolai Ehlers, Evgeny Kuznetsov, like all of these guys who are supposed to be, that's just a portion of the names of the players who have been, tied to rumors with the Montreal Canadiens, this summer alone, in the last 2 months alone, all of those players, at one point or another, somebody in the media has come out and said the Canadiens are looking at these guys. And so, yeah, they're looking at those guys, and yeah, they're involved. Yes, they're calling, Ottawa when they hear that Giroux's available, because maybe they can get Giroux for nothing. But they're not going to get him unless they can get him at a right price and in a way that, that helps the team. Look at the rumors versus the actual moves, right? Look at all the rumors that have been out there and how many moves the Canadiens have actually made. All of those players I just named, not one of them is coming to Montreal. None of them. But yet we've all heard, the Canadiens are looking at this and the Canadiens are looking at that. Jonathan Toews, the Canadiens are very interested in Jonathan Toews. They're really, into Toews as a player. Bo Horvat. We talked about Bo Horvat. I mean, that rumor went around for almost a month, right? And Joe Veleno's on the ice with the Montreal Canadiens. He's practicing with a couple of the guys, and he's a free agent. He must be coming to Montreal. The Canadiens need a second line center. Got to be Jared McCann, right? Seattle's got too many centers, and McCann's coming, and Pierre Lebrun says, the Canadiens have inquired about Jared. There have been 100 rumors, and there have been 2 trades, right? And one of those trades, there wasn't a single peep about it until the trade was actually made, right? Zach Bolduc. Nobody was talking about the Canadiens getting Zach Bolduc, right? Nobody, Zach Bolduc wasn't even a consideration. So all of these other names are out there because, somebody heard somebody say something to somebody's cousin, but yet, when the trades are actually made, like Alexandre Carrier, right? That wasn't talked about. Nobody was talking about the Carrier trade before that was made. The Kirby Dach trade. Nobody was talking about the Kirby Dach trade before. So the reality is if the Canadiens make a move, it's highly unlikely that you're going to hear about it from, some online insider or podcast or BPM Sports or George Larac or whoever. It's highly unlikely that you're going to hear about it from one of those guys before the trade's actually made, right? The Canadiens are not leaking this stuff. Now, there's some, obviously the Laine move, we knew about that a little bit beforehand, but again, that's Columbus, right? That's Columbus trying to drive up the price and trying to get the best deal that they can. Same with Dobson, right? We knew a little bit about Dobson for a couple days. Obviously Dobson's name was floating around because, he was a guy who appeared to not be happy in New York, and he was a right-handed defenseman, and there were a number of teams out there that needed a right-handed defenseman, so the Canadiens were kind of attached to him that way. But leading up to the trade itself, I mean, if you hear Jeff Gordon talk about it, it was something that happened in like 3 or 4 days, right? They heard that Dobson was on the market, they inquired and they worked out a deal and the deal was made. It wasn't something, that was, subject of all kinds of rumor beforehand. And again, any rumor that there was out there or any word that, obviously we heard in the last days that, it came down to Columbus and to Montreal, and that, he had expressed that he didn't want to go to the West and so on. But this was the Islanders, trying to drive up the price, right? Trying to get a better deal. Perhaps it was even Columbus. But again, it's very rare that it will be very rare that you're going to hear about trades that the Montreal Canadiens are about to make, in the media beforehand. It's just not going to happen. So, when you're hearing these rumors, when you're hearing, everybody talking, yeah, it's sensational, and everybody wants to think about Sidney Crosby and what it would be like to see him in a Montreal Canadiens uniform. I love it too. It would be great, but realistically, it doesn't fit with the long-term plan that this management group has told us over and over and over again, and the principles that they bring to the table when it comes to all this. Yes, they will bring Sidney Crosby in if they can do it at an extraordinarily reasonable price, and it makes sense for them to do it within their the values and principles of their rebuilding plan, right? So if they can get him really, really cheap, if they can get him on a short-term contract, or I mean, obviously he's got 2 years left, I think, on his contract. If they, all of those things come to light, then yeah, they'll do it. But they're not going to go and trade, 2 first-round draft picks and a prospect for him. They're not going to go and trade guys who they feel are part of their group currently, and will be long-term contributors to the group in return for a guy who, is going to be around for 2 years. Yes, there's benefits to him coming, but again, these are rumors, right? And we know that there's hundreds of rumors out there, and the reality is only 1 or 2 moves are ever made. And most of the trades that the Canadiens make are not bantied about on social media beforehand. So, anyways, that's kind of the show for today. That's what I wanted to get into. I was kind of hoping that you guys would have a little bit more to say, and that there would be some commentary or some questions, or you would ask me about specific trade rumors or things that you had heard or whatever. If you have any, feel free to fire away. I don't know who's watching here now, but that's sort of what I want to talk about. Again, I get it. It's it's exciting that we don't have to sort of sit on our hands and wait for 2 months for the season to start, and that it's nice to have things to talk about and whatever. But there's real things to talk about with this team, right? There's real things to to discuss, and rather as opposed to sort of all this speculation about people ask me all the time, like, who's going to be on the this line or that line. I have no idea. Training camp's in a month and a half. Thoughts on Malkin to the Habs from Jeffers on TikTok. Again, applying the thought process that we just talked about at length, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever from the point of view of the Canadiens rebuild, right? It doesn't fit within their, the principles and the values or the approaches that they've taken to rebuilding this team, right? It doesn't jive with the preference for internal development. It doesn't really make sense with respect to the long-term plan of being perennial cup contenders. Would they bring him in if they could get him for next to nothing for a year or two? Maybe. Does Evgeny Malkin fit the culture that the Canadiens are building, the identity of the Montreal Canadiens? Not really. So from that perspective, if there is a rumor out there that Malkin is coming to the Canadiens, when I apply that sort of that thinking to it, my sense is that there's probably not much to that rumor, right? Malkin is 37 years old, whatever he is, 38. Has a reputation as being a bit of a cantankerous type. I won't call him a malcontent. I don't think he's a malcontent, but not exactly a guy who, obviously he's, I think he's probably a good guy in the room, but not a guy who's going to bust his tail all the time. Don't know that he fits with the organization and what they're really planning to do. So when I hear that, as a possible rumor, then, I don't really give it much credence, I guess. How do I feel about the Habs off season? It's been good. Again, I think the Canadiens have stuck to their plan. They haven't become impatient. They haven't, they're sticking to their plan. They've been patient. They haven't, despite what the fans and the media might be telling them, they're not sort of being influenced by that. They're being, true to their own values and principles and whatever. They've made a couple trades that both were sort of trades of opportunity. Both will make the team better. I think they had no choice but to let guys like Armia and Dvorak go. Obviously, David Savard retired. So, there's there are some, I don't want to call them holes in the lineup, but there's some spots in the lineup where they're weaker than others. But again, the goal is not to win the Stanley Cup this year. The goal is to develop and to continue improving and getting better and moving toward the ultimate goal of becoming a perennial Stanley Cup contender. And in that sense, I think they've done quite well so far this offseason. Jeffers, I disagree. I'm not saying there's a rumor. It's summer. It's fun to talk trades for Demidov. Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely. It's summer. It's fun to talk trades. I mean, it's fun to talk trades, but again, if you're talking trades with any sense that you think it's going to happen, then I think it just doesn't make sense, right? And how do I explain it? Like, yes, it's fun to talk trades. It's fun to imagine what it would be like to have Sidney Crosby on the Montreal Canadiens. But at the end of the day, it's not the best thing for the Montreal Canadiens, right? The Canadiens are better off not getting Sidney Crosby, unless, like I said, they can get him for next to nothing. The Canadiens are better off not getting Evgeny Malkin, right? Canadiens fans are used to, being distracted and having big shiny objects, right? The biggest toy, the newest toy. We're the Canadiens. We're the Dallas Cowboys of the NHL. We're the New York Yankees. Like we should be out there. When the biggest shiniest toys out there, we should be. Well, that's not what's in the best interest of the team. The best interest of this team is to stick to the plan. And stick with their young players and stick to developing from within and building the team up over a period of time to the point where they can be a successful team and they can be a perennial contender, right? It's not in the team's best interest to go out and just start signing, free agents in their mid-30s. It's not in the best interest of the Canadiens to trade away draft picks and prospects for veteran players. The best interest of this team, if you really want this team to be a winner and your ultimate goal is to see this team succeed, then you're not advocating for or you're not pushing for those types of moves. But I get it. Yeah, it's fun to talk about that stuff. And it's obviously when you get into July and August, you start to get hungry for for hockey and for your team and for news and whatever. But again, I don't think that means that you have to start engaging in all of this sort of unrealistic speculation, right? There's all kinds of interesting, fun topics to talk about, even in July and August, that don't involve starting ridiculous trade rumors. And as far as Malkin being some sort of a mentor for Demidov, one, I don't know that Demidov needs a mentor. Two, I don't know that Malkin is the ideal guy to play that role, right? The Canadiens have guys on their team already who can be mentors, right? They have, Malkin, apparently Malkin's on the ice twice a day, 5 days a week, and in the gym 5 days a week, right? All through the summer. Lane Hudson, can't get him off the ice, right? These guys are motivating themselves, right? So do they need a mentor? And if they do need a mentor, then you've got guys like Brendan Gallagher, and you've got guys like Josh Anderson, and you've got guys like Jake Evans, and you've got guys like Mike Matheson. You've got mentors out there. Evgeny Malkin's Russian, and so is Ivan Demidov. But you don't have to be from the same country or speak the same language in order to be somebody's mentor, right? Marty St. Louis is a mentor to these kids, right? All of the, Paul Byron, we talked to, Paul Byron and Rob Ramage, right? We heard Logan Mailloux talking about his relationship with Rob Ramage and how much of a mentor he was to him during his time in Montreal, and even, probably will continue to be going beyond this. You don't have to bring in a 37-year-old, washed up Russian former superstar to or bring in, Evgeny Kuznetsov to be a mentor. I don't think you need that. Trade deadline, anything can happen. Yeah, I mean, anything can happen at the trade deadline. Anything can happen before the trade deadline. But again, keep in mind all of the principles and all of the values that the Canadiens have incorporated into their rebuild when you're thinking about the trade deadline. The Canadiens, even if they're in strongly in a playoff spot, when the trade deadline rolls around, they're not going to go out and start trading away their top prospects and their draft picks to bring in some guy who will play for the team, for the rest of the year or even a year or two, right? They're not going to go out and trade a bunch of prospects to bring in a rental. Like, they're not bringing in a guy who's going to quote unquote put them over the top at the trade deadline. Like, these are not the kinds of moves they're trying to make. They're not putting the finishing touches on this team, right? This is not finishing touch time, right? And I don't know that there ever is a finishing touch time. That's when you get yourself in trouble, right? You start mortgaging your future for now, right? We have a chance to win now, so we're going to give up, a huge amount of, our future in order to bring in, that one guy who, might be able to help us out. That's not a strategy that fits with the, the philosophy of the Canadiens rebuild. And it's not me telling you that. Kent Hughes will tell you that. All you have to do is listen to what he's saying, right? The media likes to distort and dissect and overanalyze everything that, Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes say. But, if you listen to them, they'll tell you. I mean, obviously they're not going to share everything, and they haven't shared everything. But if you pay attention, there's enough out there. They're giving you enough that you can understand, what the reality of the situation is and what their plan is and what their how they approach all of this stuff. So I think that's going to be just about it. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. On n'a pas eu beaucoup de questions aujourd'hui. On n'a pas eu beaucoup de commentaires. Not a lot of questions or comments today. We had quite a few yesterday's show, but I thought we might get a little bit more today. If you are watching the show after the fact and you do have some questions, you agree with me, you disagree with me, feel free to pose your questions in the comment section. I do answer them as best as I can. So yeah, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe down below. There's a button down there somewhere for you to subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the show. If you're enjoying the content, si vous aimez le contenu, vous pouvez toucher au bouton avec le pouce, la pouce. Si vous aimez le contenu de l'émission, si vous voulez être membre de notre communauté, vous pouvez toucher le bouton souscription en bas. We'd love to have you guys. Like I said, I'm trying to give you guys some content here. I'm trying to give you a different approach to the Canadiens and to Canadiens content than perhaps some of the other outlets are giving you. Hopefully you enjoy that. If you do, great. I appreciate it, and I'd love for you to subscribe. If you don't, that's fine too. If you want to go, to the other sources, then I get that as well. But again, I'm trying to be a little bit different here and not just sort of, jump on the bandwagon with all of these rumors. I want to, take a bit of an analytical or a critical approach to a lot of this stuff. And, like I said, when I hear that Jonathan Toews is, on the verge of signing for the Montreal Canadiens, I want to approach that rumor critically and try and figure out whether or not, it's something we should really take seriously or whether it's, just that, a rumor. So, yeah, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I really do hope that you enjoyed the show. I certainly did. Again, I welcome your comments, your feedback. If you enjoy the show, if you don't enjoy the show, if you think there's things that we could do better, si vous aimez l'émission, si vous n'aimez pas l'émission, si vous avez des suggestions sur des choses qu'on peut faire mieux, des améliorations pour l'émission, j'aimerais bien vous entendre. I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, I'm here to interact with you guys. I'm not just here to ramble and babble on. I'm really looking to have conversations and to have discussions with, with other Canadiens fans about our team, as we make our way through a long off season and work our way towards the training camp. Training camp coming up soon. Rookie camp will be probably in about a month and a half, and then things will get going. So, thanks so much for joining us. Merci beaucoup d'avoir été ici. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you in the next one. Peace out.
Pour un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, I want to be in that building on a Saturday night.